Hey, hi, hello, welcome to episode 75 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail, brought to you by our friends over at The Feed. I'm Corinne Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
And we are all back on the recovery to training for our next race thing. But I don't know if you guys have experienced this. Sometimes those post-race recovery periods can linger. You can feel great immediately, but then you can kind of feel rough a week later. And I'm wondering how you guys are both feeling as you get back into the training groove. Hillary's already been off racing her bike again, so maybe this is not a question for her. Keely, let's start with you. How are you feeling as you've kind of gotten back into the swing of things post Transvolcania?
Yeah, great question. I started running 5 days after the race, felt really good, and then got hit hard with norovirus, which was spreading through Spain. It was just sick, couldn't keep any food down for 4 days. So I think that actually helped my recovery because I did nothing for 4 more days. So I was off for 10 days and now I feel really good. So
a blessing.
It was not fun, but it was definitely a little bit of a blessing in disguise. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that later. I've had a very similar experience post my first Western States with not norovirus, but something else that took me out for a number of days. Hillary, you've already been back on the bike doing crazy stuff. How are you feeling in the post? I know that running, though, it seems has been kind of a getting back into the swing of things more maybe this past week. How is that feeling?
Yeah, so exactly like you said, I think the bike is obviously a good thing for especially kind of recovering the muscles and the ankle. So that's good. But yeah, running has taken a little bit more momentum to kind of get going since honestly last year. But I feel like I'm trying, I feel like I'm getting into it. Corinne and Keely, maybe you can both relate to that. I definitely know, Corinne, you have when, you felt like you got some momentum and then something, popped up again. So it's frustrating, but it's also just a reminder to stay patient. And honestly, why I really kind of love this sport is just being that super process driven athlete. I think that's kind of what keeps me going. And also kind of doing the dual sport thing. It's got other goals are kind of keeping me going as well and staying motivated.
Yeah, you've got Unbound this will come out after Unbound, right?
Oh boy. I'm weirdly nervous for this race. It's I think it's always going to be muddy and it's always it's a 205-mile race. You never know what can happen. So, but there's always so many factors. It's northbound, the gravel's the size of my fist and it's razor blades. So it's just going to be a long day out there, but it's already forecasted to be super rainy and muddy. So
nice. This is the race that Heather Jackson and Anna Yamaguchi, I think, both had to single speed in for a while.
Oh yeah,
last year because their derailleurs completely exploded. So,
or at least it's good. It's good for the Heather Jacksons and me of the world because we can hike with our bikes and run whatever with our bikes when it gets to be really muddy, which might be necessary because. Nice. Contrary to popular belief, you should not ride through that mud. It can break your bike.
Cyclocross, here we come. Well, we're going to dive more into that kind of post-race and in-season recovery. We've talked a lot about, the off-season taking breaks, but we're going to dive back in kind of Trail 101 style in this episode to talk specifically about how we prioritize recovery throughout our week, throughout the month, throughout the race season itself as well, not just those end of season breaks. But before we do that, we've got to hit some news and some results. And before we do any of that, we have to give a shout out to our title sponsor, The Feed. They just moved warehouses because they are going bananas. They are, I think, really coming into their prime in a big way. Maybe it's just because they sponsor a bunch of us, but we're The Feed, I think, has really created a big name for themselves. And we are very excited to be a very small piece of that puzzle. I'm wondering in this kind of time of getting back into the swing of things, Keely, you moved house. Hillary, you've been gallivanting all over the place. I think you're currently in Boulder, but you've been traveling a bunch. What have been the things from The Feed getting you through, not just maybe training, but also the ups and downs that is life as well?
Well, I actually some of these new bars. I keep on saying it's the Velo Forte. They're natural bars I can just take with me.
I've tried the chews from that company too, and they're weird, but they're quite good.
Right. They have a different flavor profile and it's just real food. So it's something, I could throw together in my kitchen, but then I don't have to. So it's really nice. But Yeah, and honestly, just being able to have like a variety of things. It's like one of my favorite things to order from the feed is just like a variety pack of like new brands I haven't tried of like either different gels or different bars. And so I feel like I never get like flavor fatigue, and it's good not only just for fueling like when running and riding, but just in life in general.
Yeah, we got to have snacks. Snackies on deck at all times. Keely, what's been going on with the move into the new house, the new old house?
We've been in smoothie land because it requires not much cooking and just uses our like immersion blender. So I've been doing a lot of like the goo octane vanilla protein, and then just recently got the Laird superfood greens to try those, and we've been liking that flavor. And so kind of throw those in with like a bunch of frozen berries, both those things, and that's our go-to right now because requires a lot less cooking and our kitchen is not very usable. So
look at it's our user friendly. The feed, your one-stop shop for when your kitchen appliances are still in boxes. If you want to try out greens to different proteins to recovery tools and everything in between, you're going to head over to www.thefeed.com/trail society. There you can join our, basically I'm calling it our snack club, but you can get a $20 credit every quarter, so $80 to spend over the course of the year. Our sick water bottles are taken over. One of my athletes I was just on the phone with got one recently and gave it to his daughter, and she's obsessed with it. I don't know that she's a podcast listener, but she's got a bottle and she's stoked on it. So, yeah, go check it out. Again, www.thefeed.com/trail society. Okay. News, science, fun things, whatever we're calling the first segment of the podcast this week. We've got a couple things to talk about. I think we should start actually, because we're talking about nutrition. Let's talk about just briefly the awesome sauce controversy. And if you're not a Reddit follower, and we're not going to dive into the who said what and who did what and what's happening, but mostly it's like a PSA, like, hey, if you are an awesome sauce fan, which I totally get it, I have eaten my fair share of awesome sauce, and you are trying to get 60 grams or 80 grams of carbohydrates an hour, it turns out you're probably not getting close to that. They've had a bunch of private testing done. Spring has not really come back with any actual information yet. They're supposedly reformulating things, but haven't like apologized or said oopsie or anything. But it's looking like it's more like 16 grams or about 76 calories or something on average, like between 16 and 18 grams of carbohydrates per packet, which is like less than half the stated value, which is like a big FDA no as well. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any hot takes on how much money you've blown on awesome sauce.
Oh, go ahead, Hills.
No, I do have a little bit of something, because I've asked Amanda Basham, who's on that team, and there was kind of an internal, and I've heard it's an external email sent by the owner of Spring, basically that they hired some testers to do the same tests, and basically came back with about 20% less of the carbohydrate content listed on the label, which is technically within the FDA regulations. However, I mean, I still think that's significantly less.
That's 8.8 grams difference.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
minimum.
And also like that doesn't, like, that is contrary to, and maybe they have,
way contrary to what was reported on the packaging.
Yeah. And what like other private testers have done. We're not talking about like Reddit individual users doing their own DIY. There we go. DIY research. We're talking about like private nutrition labs, both in the US and in Germany, doing this. And overwhelmingly, it's come back 16 to 18 grams. And while I think Spring has come back to say, hey, like there's batch variability, and it's like,
of course.
well,
can't be that
20% off or 50% off or 60% off is like batch variability that like isn't cool. You know, like that's a big miss in your nutrition when you're trying to get in 70 grams of carbohydrates per hour.
And I mean, if you compare to the price is like $4 for a gel that's now
$4.80. It's almost $5.
Giving you 17 grams, we'll call it, of carbohydrates versus like $1.20 for a goo that gives you 20 to 22 grams of carbohydrates. It's just like the price doesn't make sense anymore. And I feel bad for like a lot of athletes that I've coached and I've talked to who like, you know, don't get energy gels for free, and like they're, you know, saving money that they're not spending on like their family or other things like for these really expensive gels because they like think they're natural and giving them 45 grams of carbs, so they think they need less gels than other ones. And like, I don't know, that makes me really sad. That puts like a pit in my stomach because these people are like trying to fuel really well and they're like putting their money where they think it should go, and it's just like a complete scam. So
yeah, it's like oatmeal cream pies are probably pretty reliable, and
Or
they
the
are very
carbs fuel.
they're very cheap. You know,
I think that one's a pretty efficient price. Even more.
oh yeah, the
Nutrition
carbs.
Cup.
Yeah, the brand Carbs is like the cheapest, I think, gel on the market per gram of carbohydrate right now.
Let's all be at-home scientists and, you know, like do our own testing of all these gels to corroborate.
N of one all the time, baby. No, I just think it's interesting, and I think that there was actually crowdfunding done on Reddit because our community is so freaking cool and weird, and we love you guys.
There's a lot of scientists in the running community. So
oh yeah, but so there's been crowdfunding for independent testing to be done on a couple spring products as well as some other products, Precision, Morton, etc. And that's what I'm excited to see is this like that community funded, independent tested, like lab tested results, because that to me is really interesting. And it's like, yeah, I just think that the awesome sauce gate is real, and I'm sorry if you have bonked in a race due to it. I probably have. So
my biased opinion is to just go spend the $5 on 5 different goo gels and get 100 grams of carbs.
Just know you have it. Yeah, totally. I think that's all we're gonna need to say about that. But just keep your eyes peeled. There's more information coming out, and I've been underwhelmed by Spring's response, unfortunately. And I do like a lot of their products. I don't like some of their marketing because some of it's pretty diet culture heavy, but I do like a bunch of their products. So that is a bummer to see. The other thing we wanted to touch on today was there's been some changes to how UTMB is doing anti-doping. Quartz has been out for about 2 years now. Quartz was like go back. There's an episode where I rant about it for probably 20 minutes. It's an excellent rant about medical kind of malpractice and discrimination. But kind of it was put out in a press release recently. I'm quoted in the press release, I'm pretty sure, actually, because I'm the chair of the anti-doping working group for the PTRA. I have personally been part of a USADA testing pool before for my previous sport. So I'm like very, very like, I don't know. I've been in it. I've been in the trenches. I've filled out my whereabouts, etc. But essentially, I just want to make sure that we're clear with what the current system is, because a lot of people are like, cool, UTMB is doing WADA testing, and that's not 100% accurate. It's I would call it, and that's what I called it on Jason Koop's podcast as well, as WADA adjacent testing, i.e. they're not making up their own rules anymore, which is good. Like that was a big thing. I told UTMB, you're not allowed to make up your own rules. There are a global set of rules that every other sport has agreed to, and we should just agree to those rules. We're not going to reinvent the wheel and decide that something specific is against our moral code. We're not going to ban TUEs. We're not going to, we're going to follow WADA's example. And so they have partnered with a private testing agency called the ITA, or the International Testing Agency, which is a private Swiss organization who their background is more in like sports development than anti-doping, but they're really well organized. They're a nice group of people. I've had several meetings with them. They owe me one more meeting to talk specifically about TUEs. So I will fill you in when I know more about that. But essentially they are running, they are the company that we have contracted with, that UTMB is contracted with. They're putting a lot of money into it. Testing is not cheap. This is just in competition testing. This is not out of competition testing. Because that is additional expense. But essentially, we went this way with the ITA because we don't have a global signatory yet in trail running, i.e. kind of an invested but unbiased party that, I don't know why I said party that way. That was super weird. But essentially, you need like someone that's invested in the sport but isn't like implicated in the sport, i.e. it couldn't be a brand. It really can't be the PTRA. It really can't be UTMB per se. That becomes a global signatory, which allows us to then be like fully in the WADA system, which comes with benefits like access to ADAMS, which is like how we know how many athletes in what sport have been tested, etc. And there's a chance that we become kind of fully in WADA as World Athletics gets more involved in trail and ultra running. World Athletics is presenting the next World Mountain and Trail Running Championships happening in the Pyrenees in 2025. So like that's coming down the pipeline, but this is our first step of like very straightforward. The athletes know the rules. There's education available in a WADA compliant system, and they will be doing testing at the finals as well as all of the majors. Some might be contracted privately by the ITA. They might also utilize national anti-doping agencies or organizations like the French National Anti-Doping Agency. USADA did the testing at Canyons, for example, et cetera, and so on. So it's not WADA running the testing, but this is a great but imperfect step forward is how I would describe it and how I've had that conversation with other people. So it's one step forward in a number of steps that need to keep happening.
Right. Yeah.
So educate yourself, understand the global dro, like be thoughtful about medications, be thoughtful about supplements, etc. There's more and more scrutiny, and the burden of proof, as we've talked about before, is your responsibility as an athlete. So you really need to know and be responsible for what's going in your body. And that is more and more important as we utilize modern testing.
Yeah, this is a great step in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's a small step, but it's definitely the right one. And I'm excited to have been a part of it and to keep that door open, to keep that seat at the table within UTMB. Because while I think that they aren't the like king and queen of the trail and ultra running castle, I do think that they have a really important role in how we guide the sport forward. And so I want to have a seat at that table to continue to hopefully steer our sport in a direction that we would all like to see it go. Okay. Some more nerding, some more nerdling, less ranting, more nerdling. I want to give a shout out to a quick study, and then we'll dive into some really cool iron science that Keely and I have been obsessing over. But Aura announced recently that they, along with the app Clue, which is a period and ovulation tracker, have partnered with researchers at UC Berkeley to run a study looking at how perimenopause and menopause affects women's health. And they, come out and say, this is an under-researched group. When Clue ran surveys, 50% of women didn't know what perimenopause was, couldn't tell you what the symptoms were. And so essentially they want to do research with Aura members. They're essentially, I guess, going to actually like use historical data, and they're also going to give Aura rings to all the participants that are recruited through UC Berkeley. And they're going to collect heart rate, skin temp, HRV, sleep changes, as well as like historical data. Look at symptoms that are tagged and reported within Aura, including insomnia, night sweats, hot flashes, mood changes, migraines, etc. They'll do symptom tracking, I think, actually with Clue. And then they're going to kind of use this to quantify where women that are entering perimenopause. And the aim of the study is to better understand and predict changes women go through in later life to help provide them with resources, tools, and guidance so they feel supported through that transition. Because I definitely have coached women that are perimenopausal, and it is like swinging a bat in the dark. I'm pretty sure when it comes to like how you feel on any given day. Yay. That's really exciting, sitting here, not yet perimenopausal, but being like, but there are women that like as early as 35 essentially can enter perimenopause. So many of you listening to this might actively be experiencing symptoms. But yeah, we can link. I'll pull the press release for the show notes. I don't know what their recruiting period looks like or kind of where you geographically need to be based. But if any of you are interested in it, maybe we can send you in the right direction. Nerds. I love it.
It's so cool because like again, to your point, we're all like swinging in the dark. Even some physicians also don't know when perimenopause starts. And so I think because you can't go see your doctor like every week and tell them like, these were my symptoms from this last week. And like, this is all the stuff. It's cool that you could then, have all this data to take to your physician and be like, hey, this has been my data for the last 6 months to the last year, whatever it might be. I think I'm like feeling a lot different. Do you think this looks like it could be perimenopause? And obviously it will look different for everyone, but this is a really cool step in this research world. And yeah, I was super stoked to read about this.
And I think we're going to see more research from organizations utilizing Aura for tracking purposes. It's a non-invasive wearable. It's user friendly. It tracks information really well. I think we're going to see more of it. We saw initial research, essentially for it to be FDA approved along with natural cycles. There was really cool studies that came out of UC Davis in the Sacramento area. So Oura Ring has like a history of being utilized in kind of these university-based research projects, which is cool. It's not like the company funding these projects in-house. It's this kind of these partnerships with major universities to do the research, which in my mind is important because it kind of removes bias, but it gives a company like Oura Ring more and more validation, which is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the things we deal with at Nike is like we could run the study ourselves, but then we just have to rerun it with someone else. Right. So you might as well just outsource it from the get-go if it's something you want to actually like proclaim it to the masses, you know.
Be published, But
yeah, then thinking about like what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where we just found the new measure to quantify like energy expenditure throughout the day. You know, throw that into this, and all of a sudden you could start seeing a study in which you're looking at, you know, training over time in relation to energy consumption, energy, you know, needs, and then symptoms and
I think you could do a really cool athlete driven study looking at LEA and REDs with Oura Ring tracking, which would be,
if you want to do it, let us know.
Let us know. We can we have some benign interest in the subject. Okay, well, I guess before we do that, and I'm going to misquote it, but maybe Keely remembers this, or Hillary, if you saw this on Instagram. I know Rachel Drake shared it, our fan favorite Rachel Drake. But it was like, I think the shocking part was like for the first time ever was how it was like proclaimed. They like quantified the metabolic cost to pregnancy, and it's massive. Like it's insane, which I think we all knew, but a lot of studies in my mind, the conclusion is well duh. And this was kind of one of those well duh moments, but I think it was really validating for a lot of people, for a lot of athletes to see this number put out there. And I don't actually know the number off the top of my head, but it was something absolutely insane. I don't remember, but the biggest thing is that it's actually more crazy that it was like, for the first time ever in 2024, we've figured out the metabolic cost of pregnancy. And we're like, why wasn't this done like 60 years ago?
Yeah, it was published by the New York Times. And basically they were saying that there's 50,000 calories that a human pregnancy demands over the course of 9 months. And like my follow-up to that was like, and Rachel's as well, was like, wow, that's during the 9 months. What then is the caloric demand of postpartum and breastfeeding? Yeah. So it's just like so wild. And then my other thought was like, well, then extrapolate that to exercising mamas. And like, that's even more fuel, you know, if you're running every single day, add that to that 50,000. And that's just like absurd. I think Rachel and I were joking on a run after this. And she's like, I mean, if that's not good evidence for getting some subsidized food money as a pregnant woman, I don't really know what is, but
Yeah, 110%. So welcome to being a female participant or non-participant in science. They'll eventually tell us stuff about our bodies that we've known for decades, if not millennia. Okay, speaking of things that we know and don't know, we've gotten a lot of questions recently, just like in our DMs and just like anecdotally talking to our communities, etc., about iron. And so we want to dig into some some iron basics today too, and within the news and science section, just because I think it's really good information as we head into the race season, the busy season for a lot of folks. Maybe you're going to altitude for a race, etc. And I think that this information is really, really important for everyone, like heading into that season. So Keely, I'm wondering if you want to kick us off as to kind of the topic and what people should know.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to throw around a lot of terms in this, and we'll try to keep it pretty simple, but I think a lot of you can understand what iron is. It's like an essential element for a lot of your blood production, right? And a lot of the iron is in your red blood cells. And typically in your red blood cells, you can find iron in something called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is basically what's essential for transferring oxygen from your blood from the lungs in your blood to your tissue. So it's like how you can oxygenate your muscles. And then specifically, there's a protein in muscle cells called myoglobin that basically just is like, that iron is mine. That's how I remember it. It takes the iron from the transport protein. And then the last thing we'll kind of talk about, because I don't want to talk about all of these terms, I think it gets very confusing for people, is ferritin. And that's probably what the term that a lot of you are most familiar with, because I think that's one of the bigger indicators of iron deficiency anemia or other reason for anemia. And basically ferritin is your body's ability, like it's your iron stores. And so it's a good measure of like how your red blood cell health is, because when that's depleted, you're typically in a state that's considered anemic or without adequate iron to transport all the oxygen and do all of your bodily functions.
Yeah, and it's still an important indicator because of that, it's still an important indicator for oxygen transportation and movement, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times when doctors run or when we get like an iron panel run or just a CBC, ferritin has to be added additionally to that. And we try to stress that with athletes too, that ferritin needs to be added on to your CBC, for example. And then oftentimes like a more complex or in-depth iron panel so that you have kind of some more metrics to go on besides hemoglobin.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I think kind of how I'm envisioning this, Corinne and Hillary, is like talk a little bit about like what is kind of considered iron deficiency in athletes, and then like how prevalent it is, and then maybe talk through like why this could happen for some people.
Yeah, let's
and
do
like
it.
would love your guys' insights. But some studies have shown that, you know, female athletes, there could be prevalent of iron deficiency in female athletes of up to 50%. Typically it's around 30 to 35%. So it's very prevalent in females. And with males, it's a lot more variable, but there's been studies showing between 10 and 30%. And so again, males are not as studied in this realm as much as females for once. And so I think there's just a lot more research that could be done there to get maybe a better grasp on males and their kind of thresholds. And then talking about thresholds, the number that's kind of the first red flag that we look at is ferritin, to Corinne's point. It's also an indicator of like kind of oxygen transport and overall red blood cell health. For women, the typical blood values that a lab measures is between 12 and 15 and like, oh goodness, 400 to 500, right? That's kind of considered quote unquote normal. However, in female athletes, most research suggests that in order to make training adaptations, so in order to get all that oxygen to the muscles that you need, you should have a ferritin of over 35. And then for males, it's similar to that. Again, the research is a little more gray, but the estimated for males is around 40, so above 40 for males. And again, these are just levels that I think are good checkpoints for your initial CBC plus ferritin panel to see like, okay, where am I sitting at? Like, is this going to be sufficient for my training and making all these adaptations that I want to?
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep reiterating this. Why it's important to get ferritin added on is that because you can have normal hemoglobin. You can have really normal hemoglobin, but you can have a ferritin that's well under 35 with completely normal hemoglobin. So if you don't have ferritin, you're missing a piece of the puzzle, in which it might be like, oh no, there's a reason why I feel like garbage running uphill. And it's not just the thing between your ears. And so I think that's why you can present kind of, so there's anemia with iron deficiency or without iron deficiency. So that's why ferritin, having that added on, is really important.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of reasons why your ferritin levels can drop, and we're by no means going to cover all of them. But some reasons that might pertain to those of you who are listening, for the females who menstruate, it could be due to blood loss from heavy menstruations or even just regular menstruation. And so that's something to consider. The other reason that's probably very pertinent to everyone listening to is training. So you're like, oh gosh, I train. I don't want to be anemic. What do you mean by training? So there's many reasons why training could result in a lower ferritin level. Again, not always, but one of the reasons is, I think one of the nerdiest and most fun to talk about is called foot strike hemolysis. Basically, because we're running, we're landing pretty hard on our feet, right? And that force can actually burst blood cells. And when blood cells burst, we need to replenish them. However, when we're training a lot and we're using a lot of our energy demands, that replenishment gets a little impaired. And so therefore we could have like impaired ferritin or decreased iron stores. And then, yeah, just the energy demands of endurance training can also impact ferritin in a negative way. And then the last little nerdy bit here that can also impair ferritin and iron absorption is hepcidin. I feel like you've probably heard us talk about this before. A lot of you might be confused about that, but basically hepcidin is something that's released post-training, and it is a hormone that basically inhibits your body's ability to absorb iron, and that would be necessary to basically improve your iron stores, is to absorb iron. So if you have a very long or high hepcidin response post-exercise, your bodies will be a little bit impaired at absorbing iron then.
Yeah, and it's a natural, like the hep response is like a natural response, and it's actually it's protective, right? So if you take in a lot of iron, you'll have a hepcidin spike because your body's like, no, 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 we can't absorb this. We don't want this. We don't want it in our tissues, etc. And so it's like it's also a normal response, but we have an exaggerated response as after really long training sessions or really hard training sessions. And so as endurance athletes, you get kind of like an extra little demerit when it comes to iron absorption, essentially.
Yeah, and I think the like American way of saying hepcidin is hepcidin. I just kind of say hepcidin now ever since this one really cool iron dynamics podcast off the Coopcast. This girl from the UK says hepcidin.
British,
and I feel like I kind of love it.
love
Yeah.
that.
Anyways, it's hepcidin, but I kind of love hepcidin.
That's
so
like how
British
English and also Canadians say skeletal tissue
instead
of skeletal
exactly.
or capillaries instead of capillaries.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a beef with British English.
Yeah, and then so anyways, thanks. That was my clarifying that. So that's why we just said it differently. I will totally own that. A couple other reasons why ferritin levels could drop, and we won't go into crazy details here. Again, a lot of this is just the facts. We're not trying to be your doctors. We're not trying to tell you anything that you need to like go do or anything. We're just trying to give you some facts. But low energy intake or low energy availability could lead to this. That kind of makes sense, right? If you're not having enough intake or energy intake to like get a menstrual cycle, you're probably not going to have enough to like do really good maintenance physiological processes either. So that could lead to impaired ferritin as well. And then some people have impaired ferritin or low ferritin because of their diet. They might just not be eating enough heme iron or non-heme iron. So that could just be an easy adjustment for someone. Another issue that would be obviously something you would need to discuss with your doctor would be a GI issue, could be something like celiac, could be some sort of like GI bleed. And then the last thing, and again, this is by no means all-inclusive or all-encompassing, but vitamin B12 deficiency can also be something that can lead to anemia. So these are all things. And again, it probably feels a little overwhelming, but again, I think just knowledge is a little bit of power. It doesn't mean you're SOL if your ferritin levels drop. There's a lot of reasons for it and a lot of ways you can work with your practitioner to bring it back up.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to just add that like when we say GI bleeding, it doesn't need to be like, oh my goodness, like I go to the bathroom, there's blood in the toilet type of thing. It's like, I've actually seen it in male athletes too, particularly after really hard races where you get like an ischemic gut, right? Like your blood is going elsewhere. It's going to your working muscle tissues. It's going to your skin surface, etc. It's not going to your stomach. And so you can create acute damage doing ultra endurance events. And it takes your stomach a while to recover from that. And if you have any other GI issues, a lot of runners struggle with GI issues for various reasons. One, you're not absorbing nutrients as well during that time period, and then you can have like micro bleeding that doesn't even really show up necessarily clinically, or you wouldn't see it visually, but you can do like a hemoccult test where you can look for like micro bleeding essentially with your doctor. But I've seen that in a number of male athletes who wouldn't be losing blood via menses, for example, but who are losing micro blood due to like kind of underlying gut conditions.
Yeah,
I've had that after a race before.
Yeah, not fun.
No.
Yeah. And then I feel like all of us have had anemia before, low ferritin before. Some of the symptoms you can feel are like tiredness, you can have negative mood states, you can have impaired performance. Like anecdotally, like what have you guys felt when you've been kind of low, whether that's iron deficiency anemia or just anemia?
An inability to run uphill in any meaningful capacity.
Yeah, I feel that.
It basically, to me, it feels like, and I know that like I've had to get infusions in the past, like I just don't absorb iron very well. And so if I try to supplement iron, my iron serum levels go really, really high, which can be dangerous for your organs. But it's like not being stored anywhere. So I've had to get infusions in the past. Actually being injured precluded me from needing one for a while because I just like wasn't my iron demands went down, my foot strike hemolysis went down, etc. But in my mind, I think about it as if my lactate threshold has gotten lowered, i.e., like I hit lactate threshold sooner. And I notice that more on uphills, right? Because you can think of it in like gap or normalized graded pace, where it's like I'm not running that fast, but because of the incline, you meet that threshold a lot quicker than you would on a flat surface. And so I notice it in my uphill running probably first before anything else.
But you also had a good point there too. It's because of like ferritin stores, right? There can be ferritin in your serum, like your blood serum, right? But then other places like the spleen, we actually need it. Like that's where ferritin is stored, your liver, also your bone marrow, right? But how it's stored in that absorption, like you said, you have trouble with it, and then different people can absorb it and store it in different ways. So yeah, and it matters like the source of how you're taking it, whether it's food or from an infusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like for me, it's been similar, Corinne. It's like I notice it most on the uphills. It's like, oh, I just can't hang because I'm already at lactate threshold and I can't push past that. And it's really frustrating. My also thing has been like when I was super anemic this last spring, I would sleep until like 9. And I'm like always a 5:30 to 6 a.m. girl. Like JT finally is like, what are you doing
What's wrong with you?
But I was like, oh, maybe something's wrong. But yeah, very much sleep related and performance related for me as well. And then maybe I'll skip a couple of these because I don't want to like bore people and confuse them. But
one of the things we want to talk about with Emily Krause next time we have her on is the iron topic. So we can get extra nerdy when we bring Emily back.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I think I'm just going to skip kind of to like, what could you do if yours are low and how often should you be testing kind of as a female athlete, just to not bore you with all the science. I think the major, like you guys are going to roll your eyes while you're listening to this, but like the major piece of advice that we're going to give you is like, consult your doctor. Just go consult your doctor. Consult me in 10 years. I laugh with a little bit of a nervous laugh because that's a very long time. But
oh, you're going to be fine.
I'll be here for you. And then I'd say like, if like kind of to Corinne's point, if your ferritin is not flagged by your doctor, say they're looking for something less than 12, but you're a female endurance athlete or a male endurance athlete and your ferritin's reading like a 20 or a 15, I would say like try to consult with your doctor and advocate for yourself that like you are an endurance athlete. You've seen these papers that we'll link in the show notes that recommend endurance athletes have a little bit of higher ferritin. So they have training, they can make training adaptations, just kind of advocate for yourself. And then talk with your doctor to see like what kind of supplementation routine they would recommend. Yeah, and if you do get on a supplementation routine, then our little tips for that is like try to take it outside of a window, like at least 2 hours from calcium ingestion. So like dairy, yogurt, cheese, all that kind of stuff, or coffee, like high caffeine products. Those things like to limit the ability to absorb the iron. And then don't take it like 3 or 4 hours after a run, because that's when that thing we talked about earlier called hepcidin or hepcidin, if you're from the UK and I'm not, that will block your body's ability to kind of take that iron you just took and actually absorb it. It will just get rid of it. And so that's going to be kind of useless to take the iron then. And then the last but not least is just take it with a nice dose of vitamin C. Vitamin C is your friend with iron. It will increase your body's ability to absorb it. And so those are kind of the 3 things that you want to remember is like, don't take it with calcium or caffeine. Take it right after your run or like much later after your run, and then take it with vitamin C.
Yeah. And for a lot of people too, you might get into a pattern where that means you're taking it every other day. For example, there's all sorts of kind of like methods to the madness, but I think there's a little bit of experimentation. It can be hard on your gut for a lot of folks, depending on the iron supplement. And so it's just important to kind of play with that a little bit. But then also like, I would say if it's chronically low, you're getting retested and it's not improving, trying to get a referral to a hematologist. I know that they're not always available depending on, if you live in a smaller area, et cetera, versus a big urban center. I feel very fortunate to have I struggled for a long time to have anyone take it seriously. Finally, when we ended up in San Francisco, was able to work with a hematologist there who was familiar with kind of what I was trying to do. And also just listened to me and finally was able to get in with good care there. And that's not always widely available, but a hematologist would be someone that you could consult further. And you'll be a boring patient for them because normally they're dealing with cancer patients and you are just an anemic endurance athlete. And that is a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
And it definitely matters like where you live, like at altitude or like not even if you're at like 5,000 feet, but having a doctor that you can, trust and knowing what like normal levels are for where you are at a certain altitude. Because there are caveats and like different ranges for those as well. I mean, living from Colorado, right?
Yeah, and supplementation is even more important.
I was gonna say,
when
a lot of my
you're
athletes
at
didn't do
altitude.
that. Yeah, it's like if you are a lowlander, like if you're me, you live at 0 feet, and you decide to move somewhere that's high altitude, really consider supplementing. And then if you're traditionally anemic, really work with your doctor to come up with a really good supplementation plan before you go to altitude, because otherwise you'll just deplete your stores really quickly, and that will not be fun.
Yeah. So how often, I guess, to kind of close this out, how often, if a person is getting tested already, or they're going to go get their first test, how often should they retest to see improvements? Because it does take a while. It oftentimes takes 2 to 3 months to see any real change in ferritin. So what would you recommend, or what have you heard recommended for retesting when it comes to checking iron levels?
And I'll link this article in the show notes as well. But it's recommended, especially if you're trying a new supplement or a new strategy to combat your anemia, to test every 6 to 8 weeks. So that's, 1.5 to 2 months. However, if you guys have like a good plan for bringing your iron back up, then it says you could kind of test every quarter to just make sure you're staying on track. So that would be every like 3 or 4 months. So yeah, to Corinne's point, it does take a little bit of time. So that 6 to 8 weeks is probably like the minimal where you'll actually see good changes. And then, yeah, if you are having issues with iron deficiency, that quarterly is really good. But then if you are an athlete who's not really had many issues with iron deficiency, then they just recommend getting your blood tested yearly just to stay on top of stuff.
Sweet. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you for our iron deep dive. We got to keep things moving along on the recovery train and results train. I'm just going to give shout outs. Mostly it was a lighter racing because everyone was like in the whole world, at least at for the web training weekend. It looked a lot of fun. I had horrible FOMO over the weekend for sure. I've actually never been to training camp ever. And I think that I should probably change that in the coming years and make it out one of these times. But one race that did happen over the weekend was the third stop on the Golden Trail World Series Tour. That was Zagama, the legendary race, a bucket list race for folks racing all distances. And it came with some very expected outcomes and also some surprises. On the men's side, Kilian Jornet won his 11th Zagama. He's raced it 12 times. That's kind of crazy. No course records were broken this weekend, but an 11th win is pretty silly. His teammate actually for normal finished in second, a tight battle actually between second and third. Elozou, Moroccan athlete, right? I think. In my head, he's Moroccan. I could be totally wrong with that. But he was second. He was one of the favorites going into the race. And then third was Polish star Bart P. I'm just calling you Bart P. Hope that's okay. But in the pre-race press conference, which was interesting, Bart said this is his last year just racing the Golden Trail World Series. He wants to focus on ultras next season. He might jump into a Golden Trail World Series race in the future, but this will be his final season competing as a Golden Trail World Series athlete, which I thought was like kind of cool that he just like came out and made that a thing during the press conference. On the women's side, I think this is where the surprises might be for many. Norway's Sylvia Nordskar took the win in pretty commanding fashion. She had a really great season last year on the Golden Trail World Series, but I wrote the free trail preview and she wasn't on my top 5 preview list. I think she made my like kind of other women to watch top 10 contender. But she took the win in commanding fashion. Behind her, Spain went 1 and 2 with the young and from the area Malinosa taking second, and she edged out fellow Spanish athlete Marta Martinez by 20 seconds to round out the podium. It was just like once again like a historic weekend of racing at Zagama, and the Golden Trail World Series will move on to their 4th stop at Marathon du Mont Blanc at the end of June. Craziness.
It's been really cool. They've got some really cool races on that.
Yeah, I mean, Greg Valle is a crazy mastermind. Like, doesn't surprise me that he's been very successful there. We're going to move on to our meat and potatoes, though, so that we don't just take up your entire day. Though I know that you want to hang out with us all day long, get every drop out of the podcast. We talked at the top of the show about recovery and recovery from races, stating that we oftentimes focus on an off-season recovery topic, but that we haven't maybe talked on, at least not recently, kind of what recovery looks like in the season, be it during your week, during your day, during a training block, or in and around racing. So I wanted to take time today to talk about what we do and what we do with ourselves and our athletes, and maybe we don't heed our own advice sometimes, to utilize that time period to get back to equilibrium. So we're going to start by talking about racing. So we're kind of going like macro, acute, intense, all the way down to like daily recovery. We're doing a reverse periodization with this topic. So to start, I want to talk about rest around races. And I'm wondering if you guys have a rule of thumb that you follow when it comes to how much rest you take post-race, and if that changes based on the distance of the race. And then do you practice what you preach, i.e., is there a rule of thumb that you follow or that your athletes follow, and are they the same or not? You might be outing yourself, so I apologize in advance. Yeah, take it, Hillary.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it really depends on, I guess I'll talk about it from like a coaching standpoint of like how new the person is to running and to racing ultras. Because I also know, like, correlative to my athletic journey, I needed more recovery when I wasn't used to running that much. And it just like, not only I think it was also physically, but it's just a big mental task. And I needed to kind of come down from that. But still, I think I've heard general things as like a day off for every 10 miles or something like this. But, I
feel like that's I'm accrediting Ann Trayson to it. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I think it was like 3 days off. And then it was a day for every 10 miles over 50K or something like that. Or it's 2 days off and then like a day for every 10 miles over 50K.
Right. So I like
give you about 7 to 10 days off for a 100-mile.
Right. So exactly. So typically I think even for big efforts, but I think it also kind of goes with the time, right? A more like, and especially if you're losing sleep. So even if it's like a long 50K and you end up like 50 miles, sorry, and you're like running through the night, or 100K, I still think that merits a little bit more recovery just because of the missed sleep standpoint.
Yeah, like a Lavaredo versus a Black Canyon 100K, kind of different ball games for the front of the pack where you're not going through. You're going through the night at Lavaredo because of the midnight start versus a 5 a.m. start, let's say at Black Canyon.
Oh yeah. Keely knows full well about that Lavaredo midnight start. I think that was like raining. It was insane that year. But then, for me, it's kind of that I always just take like, I think I have that same rule for like a 50K, especially if it's like a training run, like maybe this is bad. Like I don't, take 1 or 2 days off and then, kind of using that's like my long run for these,
and a training run race might be a little bit different than a race where it's your A race, you're going to the well, right? That's also kind of a different status.
But I mean, when I raced like snow marathon, I felt like it was a slip and slide, and I was like, running really hard, and I like needed to take the week like really easy and to take more rest days than I would have thought whatever like necessary or like typically what I had pre-planned. But I mean, definitely after 100 miles, I take a full week off, and 50 mile is like depending on that too. It's like I took a week off after Transvolcania, and this was getting back on the bike, but was not running. So yeah, I think but again, for me, it's more dependent on the nature of the course and the hours that you're running. But I tend to follow that as well for, long periods of time off for these longer races, especially when you're missing sleep.
Yeah. What about you, Keely? Kind of similar to that or different?
I think mine's a little bit different. I think I put a lot of weight on where it's at in the season versus distance. So you could have a pretty long season and your season might end or culminate at a 50K, and I might make you take 10 days off after that. But that's because like we've just
the end of the season.
We've just built all season, that's like wherever you're at in your training, maybe that's your first ultra, maybe that's just where we were building to. Like I like having a reset. And so I'd say like if it's like the pinnacle race, I always make people take at least a week, if not 2 weeks.
Because that's moving more towards an off season.
But it's like proper recovery, because I think like there's just so much cumulative mileage and stuff and mental fatigue at that point that like you need that much time for proper recovery. Like I just have found that even just taking the normal time at the end of the season, it's just not quite enough. And I don't really know what that's from, but that's just been my personal experience. And then I'd say like, yeah, emphasis on the race. Like I think recovery can look different based off of if you've told them to like race versus training race. And so, yeah, if you're like racing, if you race a 50K super hard, I'll probably have you take 3 to 4 days off afterwards. If you're racing it as a training race for a 50 mile or 100K, you might only get a day off to recover afterwards. But like, that's because we've built to a spot where that 50K is not an unreasonable distance or time duration for you. And so it's a little bit more like you're going to recover quicker because you've been ready for that duration. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with Hillary in the sense that like the longer stuff and then the more novice of the athlete, I think you do need just more time because your body's just not used to it. And then this is kind of like maybe a hot take. I think sometimes
I love it.
The worse the race goes, the less you fuel, the worse it's executed. Like you're super dehydrated, the more I try to make you take off as well. Because I think like that actually has a snowball effect on your recovery, right? So like you've completely taken all your muscle glycogen away, you're super dehydrated, you've had cramps, like you need a lot more time to recover than if that 50K or 50 mile or whatever distance went well in terms of fueling and hydrating. So those are kind of things I think about too. What about you, Corrine?
Yeah, and I was gonna say we'll talk more too about the like there's definitely the physical recovery versus the mental recovery and the race going well or not can definitely play into that, or where you are in the season can play into that. Yeah, I think I fall mostly into the like Ann Trayson mindset, right? Where it's like particularly after anything over, actually this is interesting because I've got an athlete doing like a training 50 mile this upcoming weekend, for example. And it's like he's training for 100 mile. The 50 mile is a training run for that, but that's still 50 miles in the body. So it'll kind of hedge in between those two things, right? Like he's not going to take a full week off, but he'll probably end up taking close to that, maybe 5 days or something. And then like he'll have some easy runs. And then with the goal being back into training swing the week after that. So it's kind of like in that in between versus if it was a peak race and he was peaking for the 50 mile race, he'd probably take a full week off. I'm okay with like easy movement if that's spinning on the bike towards the following weekend or going for walks, etc. Like that is a-okay. We've got an athlete recovering from Cocodona right now. And just like the sleep recovery after that. So it's like oftentimes 2 or 3 weeks of like walking. They're starting to do some like running if it feels good during their walks this week. So it's like intentional walking type of thing. Like I want him to get out the door and move his body, but it's not really like, I want you to go for a 30-minute run. It's like, I'd rather you walk for 30 minutes to 90 minutes or whatever, however you're feeling. And this week he can try some running during it. He's back rowing a little bit as well, but just really listening to this like sleep and the metabolic toll of a long race like that. And then for me personally, it's kind of been, really listening to how I feel after the race. I felt really good physically after Transvolcania. It turns out when you don't go to the well, you don't have much muscle damage. You feel pretty good pretty quickly. So I feel like I got really lucky after that. And I actually feel like I came out of it with a fitness bump. That doesn't always happen. So I feel like I was able to get back into the swing of training pretty quickly. Once I got my sleep from just long, hectic travel back and re-equilibriumed. But this kind of like is my next question, which we touched on briefly. Keely, this goes back to your norovirus post Transvolcania. After my first Western States in 2018, I was like on my second run back. I'd done some mountain biking, but hadn't run. It was my second run back post Western States. I was running with a friend. I took a stupid fall running downhill in Bozeman, like split my shin open, messed up my ankle, tore all the skin off my thigh. It was great. And had to get stitches in my shin. And that made me take like another week off basically just because running was uncomfortable. Like my quad kind of hurt because I had bruised it and my shin, the skin with the stitches just didn't feel good. So I took like another week off. And I think that that actually let me bounce back even better. And my next training block heading towards TDS was actually really good. And I raced really well at TDS like 2 months after Western States at the end of August that year. So I do think that like you can be surprised by like these added recovery periods sometimes. And I'm wondering if you guys have either experienced that or experienced the like you feel really good right after the race. And then like 10 days later, you're like, oh, actually that fatigue I feel is like really deep. And I didn't know it was there. It's not DOMS. It's like deep fatigue somewhere else in your body. And I'm wondering if either one of you have experienced that and how you've kind of reevaluated your training when you hit a period of time that feels that way.
I mean, for sure. I actually, I had that, I think it happened like when I did really well at a race. I was like super psyched and like I was super happy to take like, a week off and like have, the like vacation period and celebrate. But then like I was excited to kind of
You
get
were
back.
ready to go.
Right. I was like excited to get back and like go for it. And then like I started running and initially I was like, oh, it's like this feels great. And then I was like, oh no, this doesn't feel good. And having to it's hard because then I think when the motivation, kind of like momentum shifts, it's hard to kind of, like to like then slow down and then know if it's normal or not. And then, I mean, obviously that's important to have, people or your coach to talk to about it and then really not push through it because it's not really pleasant. And then, I mean, thankfully, the learning how to back off and then, so it doesn't lead to an injury, but I've had that more correlated with like a good result and then like rushing to get back. Or I've also had that like with, not being super satisfied with how I was and then trying to like rush the recovery process. Like that's never, a good idea. But I also, for me, it always hits differently. Even if the intensity is lower, for these longer distance races, it's always the lack of sleep that hits me the hardest, I think. And from a recovery standpoint, I like feeling that deep fatigue, like you mentioned, Corinne.
Yeah. Keely, what about you besides your norovirus stint last week?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always good to have extra time to take off. So if something takes you out, it's just like a blessing in disguise. But to the other point where you might feel like delayed fatigue or delayed, in my mind, like crazy hormone changes, that happens to me a lot. And I think I like at least expect it a little bit now. And it's for the like 100-mile-ish distance where like you almost feel okay a couple days after. And then like a couple weeks or even like I think 3 or 4 weeks after, you're in my mind, you're kind of up and down. It's like you're perimenopausal, like your hormones feel like they're all over the place. Like my Oura ring's a little crazy. And I actually like start telling my athletes that, like, especially female athletes, like, hey, after this 100, you might be really itchy to run like after 7 or 10 days. And I'm going to let you run, but we're not getting back to training for like 2, 3, 4 weeks. And you're going to just run when you want to. And a lot of them will get frustrated at me. And then like, without fail, week 2 or 3 or 4, one of those weeks, they'll come back to me and be like, oh my gosh, I'm like toasted and I really need to take this week easy. And it, like, you were so right that it's just like a roller coaster for a bit, and like letting them choose to run, but also telling them that it's okay if you feel crummy, that we're going to keep this like next couple weeks really fluid, I think gives them like the ability to take the day off and not feel like, oh, something's wrong with me, or, oh, I'm not tough enough. Like this is hard, but I should just push through. It's like, no, we don't know what the 100-mile does, but like, I don't think it's great. And it definitely is like a roller coaster, at least for me, for like a month. And so yeah, definitely don't rush back, and then don't put any pressure on yourself, at least, especially when you're like new to the sport, to like race really soon after like 100 or something really long.
Yeah, I feel like with the 100-mile, it's like a week off and then or a week to 10 days off. And then it's like a week of like a couple runs, but everything's pretty short. And then it's a week of like a couple more runs and like maybe some strides. And then it's like more like training. So it's like, it looks like we can say it's 7 to 10 days off, but it really looks like a month of like really gradually rebuilding, which is really important. I had an athlete refer to that time period as running on vibes. Like we're running on vibes.
That's so good.
She was like, I need a week off and then I'm just going to run on vibes for a week. And then I think I'll be ready to like focus again. And I'm like, cool.
Yep. I just give them like I give them a hard stop at 2 hours though. I'm like, by week 3, sure, run on vibes, but like do not go above 2 hours.
Yeah.
Don't go and be like, oh, oopsie, 6-hour run. Like, no
whoopsies. No whoopsies there. You can whoopsie in the off season. Like, when you're way, way, way far away from racing after you've had some time off. Okay. So taking a step back, I'm wondering if you guys both, actually, because we're all coached by different coaches, but also like we coach athletes. So I'm kind of wondering I'm taking a step way back to look at training blocks now. And I'm wondering when it comes to, training, it's adequate stress plus adequate rest equals adapting to that stimuli and load. I've got some athletes who are really not good at that adequate rest part. And we're working on it steadily. and Shirley. But I'm wondering, do you guys plan kind of down weeks or periods of kind of deloading, or is it all reactionary? Like, oh, I think they need a rest week now. Or is it like, what's the balance between reactionary rest of like all of a sudden taking a low week versus like, hey, we're going to do this for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And then I've got a week planned that I really want us to step back. Like, how do you do that with your athletes? And then what does that look like in your own personal training?
Yeah. So for different athletes that I do, it's this is why like the communication side is really important. So being able to like measure RPE or like notice patterns of like if someone's feeling low energy. And for some athletes, I purposefully like don't want, especially if they've been recovering from an injury or kind of have had like just energy fatiguing issues, or especially if they're newer runners. I even do like the 2 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. And that seems to work really well. This is also I've noticed it can help with women who are like post-menopause and or if they're having trouble. I've coached someone who had some hyperthyroidism, and like that was a really interesting, we had to get kind of creative with, she wanted to do long distance races, but really getting creative with how she could respond to training, because running too long would set her back into a really big hole. So just kind of playing around with that cadence of stuff actually works really well. I think more traditionally it's kind of like 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or if someone is a little bit more experienced athlete, like a bigger block of training, but always having that like kind of caveat, and that like that frame of reference and that little like piece of information, that data point of like, okay, is this person telling me that they feel tired for like longer periods of time, or like a little niggle is popping up, and then you kind of have to call an audible.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like really easy to be like, oh yeah, you need to like have some on weeks and then an off week. But sometimes like you need to adapt, and maybe the athlete needs a couple down weeks, and like maybe they need a week, maybe they actually feel great. And you're like, okay, let's do another bigger week, especially if like they don't have histories of like overtraining or stress fractures and stuff like that. It's like, okay, let's push this a little bit more because you're feeling great. Maybe you have a little bit of a down week at work. But like, I think my rule of thumb, especially for athletes who are juggling like a full-time career and families and all sorts of stuff, is for sure to fluctuate either 3 weeks on, a week off, or 4 weeks on, a week off, because I just don't think that you can really adapt in any training block longer than that when you have like, 60 hours or more of other stuff to do in a week. So
yeah. And I've also found that like with some of I coach like a little cohort of like professional men, oddly enough, that they're my professionals. It's like my little group of dudes. And I found that last year we probably pushed it to the extreme a little bit, where it's like we didn't take really intentional step back weeks, where we just kind of kept them high for a long period of time, and they were handling it and they were absorbing it, whatnot. And I think it's not just physical, I think it's mental and emotional. And it's like, I find with my athletes, and I stress this in like when I'm writing it in Training Peaks, for example, is like this week is not just about physical recovery, it's also about like mental recovery. And I want you to be hungry for the next training block. And I feel like it keeps them like, it keeps things reined in, it keeps things in check. It allows you to kind of like reset, reevaluate, catch up on some other stuff, and then like dive back in like hungry and excited to like get into that next, 3 to 6 weeks or something, where you're like really kind of like back on the gas for most of that. And so I definitely have skewed it. And I felt that personally too, where I've been, like in a block where I don't feel like I'm ever stepping off the gas. And it like, I need that. I crave like a time where it's like, okay, I could step back, exhale, and then dive back in. So I think that's really, really important. And rest days can play very similarly, right? When it comes to like reactionary rest days versus planned rest days. And I'd like to talk about that too. I know for me, the longest time it took me forever to be comfortable taking rest days. I hated them. I fought against them. My relationship with exercise was probably pretty out of whack during that time period. If I wasn't training, someone else was, like very negative mindset around exercise in that regard. And it took me a long time to actually do it. And I had to trick myself and say, today for training, I am resting. Like it was, the mantras had to come through. And I'm wondering both personally in your own training and then again with athletes you coach, how are you utilizing a day of rest or a day of stepping off the gas? Is that weekly? Is that every other week? Is it active recovery versus, you're laying on the couch or you're walking the dog? Like it can look differently for everyone. Actually, one more thing before I let you guys talk. I had an athlete, this Norwegian gal, who she described rest days as a day where she didn't need to shower. And I said, tell me about your hygiene habits. Like when do you need to shower? And we did agree that like the activities that she was doing did qualify as rest. And so the not needing to shower thing was a good like delineator for like, was it a day of rest or not? So I'm kind of wondering what that looks like again, that rest day for you guys and for your athletes. Hillary, if you want to kick that one off.
I love that. Although sometimes busy day and training day, I don't have time to shower and I'm just like salty and it's gross. But I think
Steven's like, you're not allowed in the bed, so I have to shower. So yeah.
That's actually smart. I live alone, so don't have that problem. But I think, Corinne, I've had this similarly personally. I've had this like weird relationship with rest days. When I first got like after the accident, like I think before it, I was okay because I was just like new to running and I was like doing what my coach said. But then afterwards, I felt like I was making it for lost time. And I felt like I really struggled with it. I mean, like I remember Corinne, like we would go on these days and you were just like, Hilly, just chill, it's like, and like
I'd catch you sneaking out for stress runs and I would be like, absolutely not.
I know. And so Adam and I really worked on that. And I also worked with my sports psychologist of just this whole idea of like really feeling like I just like I couldn't make up for lost time. Like I didn't have the luxury. I was injured for this amount of time. Like I already was resting for like months at a time. Like I needed to just go. But yeah, that basically wasn't the right way to do it. And so now I actually like really look forward to it. I also used to have like some anxiety with taper week, but now I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. I get to like, it's like a sponge. It's like, I feel like I'm like letting things like, dry so I can absorb other, like I like to use metaphors. I think about that. Like you have to wring out the sponge every once in a while to like reabsorb the training. And so I try to use those personal anecdotes to help my other athletes who have trouble resting, or kind of these ideas of like kind of like tricking it into active recovery days for like do something active for like 35 minutes, whether that's like walking your dog or like or you can go to the sauna. It kind of feels like you did something because you sweat a bunch. But things like that. But yeah, and it's just a day where you just don't have to, you just don't have to think about things. That I start to like look forward to them now. Yeah.
Keely, what about you?
Yeah, for a while I had my relationship with my coach was one where they relied on me to decide when I needed an off day for the most part. And I don't think that works super well for me, even being like full time, because I think I always just think like, oh, well, there's an option to do this, so I'll just do that, So then I just ended up not really taking many off days. And like subbing in like a 4-hour bike ride instead of an off day. And none of that works.
Just subbing in a 4-hour bike ride.
None of that works well for me. I really like having a programmed rest day. Mine are not weekly, but I think like once I start med school, it very well might be weekly. I think it depends on the workload of the person. Right now, I don't have a ton going on. So my rest days are every like 2 or 3 weeks, but I love them. I love having them programmed. I don't do anything. I take the dogs for short walks, not even long walks. And I just try to embrace it. And I think that I try to emphasize that to my athletes too. I'm like, hey, you're not a runner today. Like put on nice jeans, like go do something completely irrelevant, like eat all the good food. Don't like make your rest day about skimping on food, but like just treat yourself really well and like have a great day doing something else. And I think that I program them in almost every single one of my athletes weekly because all my athletes are full-time parents and workers. And so I think for real adaptation, you just need an off day, minimum 1 per week.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's a non-negotiable for most of my athletes and they've grown to like them. And I only have to rein them in sometimes to be like, hey, a 7-mile dog hike doesn't count as a rest day.
Yeah. It's like, you'd have to shower after that one, pretty sure. Yeah, no, it's important and it's critical. And it's again, like you don't adapt to training by training, you adapt to training by taking adequate recovery. And so I think that that's really important to stress. And stress is stress is stress. So if your other stress buckets are really full, that means training has to back off a little bit. Maybe you need an extra rest day during your week to actually absorb what you've got going on. And that is A-okay. So the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap things up with Society Slam is just kind of the like, okay, so we are training, say most days a week or 6 days a week. What are you guys prioritizing during your day to recover, be it sleep or nutrition or self-care? Like, what does that look like? How are you prioritizing rest on a daily basis, or recovery rather, on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think this is where you can kind of start to change, like, if you're thinking about recovery and like on a global scale, like how you can really impact it is like kind of on the day to day. So like zooming in on the little things that you can do each day. And personally, what I've done to help is really prioritizing sleep. So kind of being strict about like a bedtime. Especially if I have like consistent bedtime throughout the week, but especially if I have like a big day the following day, either that's workouts or a long run. And sometimes that means, especially if it's in an important training block, that means saying no to certain social activities or like leaving early. I'm the queen of the Irish goodbye, so it's okay. Like people are usually used to like, oh hey, Hilly's
Hilly
tapped out. She's
ghosted.
going. Hilly's gone. She's going to the bathroom, but really she's going to her car. But so that, and then I think also like a bedtime routine of like having a time where there's like no screens or work, or time where you can just kind of like relax and calm
Sleep
down.
hygiene. It's really important.
Yeah, and I actually have this kind of weird routine where it's like I turn the lights down and I just put some candles on, I drink some tea, and I just like have like low light time before I go to bed. And I can either do stretching or, journaling, or like sometimes none of that. I'm just like, zoning out, but like that kind of stuff. And I can realize when I don't do that as much, or if I'm, I take that with me traveling too, because that's like a hard time if you're in a new place to like I could take that routine with me, and it's really made a difference.
I dig it. Keely, what about you? How do you prioritize recovery on the daily?
Yeah, that's really smart, Hillary. I feel like we haven't really gotten that yet. We are normally like doing stuff right until bed, which isn't great, but I feel like I'm a pretty good sleeper, so it doesn't really impact my sleep hygiene. I think I'm really bad at getting good sleep in the summer because it's light out so long and I like being around and doing stuff outside. And so I have to be more mindful of like, no, I need to go to bed because I'm gonna wake up probably at 6, and so I need to be asleep by 10. But yeah, I'd say aside from sleep, definitely for me, I try to just always have like a protein shake or something right after the run. It's like a non-negotiable at this point. And yeah, I don't do enough like stretching and stuff, but we're currently with Matt Walsh, our current PT and strength coach. He's told us to start stretching more / doing dynamic warm-ups for our runs. And honestly, like I don't do them often, but I've been doing them a lot and they're really great. So it might become more of my routine and he's going to be so stoked. But it's like one of those things that every runner is like, oh, I should do those, but I don't. And I feel like, it's only been like 10 days, but I highly think that they're helpful.
It's like every time you go to yoga and you're like, I should do more yoga. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, I think for me, all those things are true. Like, I notice, like, if I'm working on a writing project after dinner, for example, because I've got time, oh man, my like wind down period is like twice as long because my brain is like really fired up. So I try to do like very brain light tasks after dinner. Just because otherwise I'm way too hyped. Like I can't shut things down. My brain is going a million miles an hour. So I've like tried to be more targeted in like winding things down sooner and getting into bed earlier, because that's a big way to get more sleep, is just to be in bed longer. Like there's studies that show that if you're in bed longer, you can boost sleep. It's like for every hour you're in bed, you get like an extra half an hour of sleep basically. So I try to get into bed early. When I can, but it's summertime, which makes it hard. It's light out until like 9:30 here or something. So it's just like, go, go, go.
I use an eye mask.
Oh, nerds. Yeah. Steven's an eye
know.
mask guy. But yeah. And then this is not a daily thing, obviously, because I am not wealthy. But I pay good money like twice a month to get body work done. I am gonna go broke doing it probably, but it's like for me and my body and my physiology, like getting good body work done like that keeps me healthy, like keeps me niggle free. I can stretch all I want, but that body work is just like for the way my body works and muscular tension and whatnot. I've been stretched by like athletic trainers since I was like 14. Like I'm not like I can't stretch myself. I failed to sit and reach since I was in middle school, blah, blah, blah. Like having someone like help me with all that stuff is really important. And so that's where I've invested my money. Like my extra little bit for my athletics has gone into body work, and that's been mission critical. So it's not daily, but it is kind of my daily thing. I wish it was daily. My daily thing is putting my legs up against the wall, actually just like taking 10 minutes or 15 minutes and like laying in bed or laying on the floor and like putting my legs up against the wall and just like that's just like relaxed time, chill time. I'm not on my phone. I'm generally reading a book, but it's 15 minutes of kind of generally resetting between activities if I can.
So I also have just like a quick shout out for the feed too. It's like they also sell like all the recovery tools and like the like, you know, I mean, there's okay, I know like the science is not totally convincing about
whatever makes you feel like the science what the
exactly.
science says is whatever makes you feel better works.
Placebo effect actually, so if you believe that it helps you, then it does actually. And so, you know, they have like Normatec boots and like to all the little recovery tools and, you know, yeah,
side kicks, rollers, Theraguns,
hip
you
hinge,
name it.
all this other stuff, like
they're there.
Hip hook. Yeah, I don't know. It's uncomfortable.
Compression socks. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, that's a great plug for the feed. If you guys need a new recovery tool, you got a birthday coming up.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. You've got Father's Day coming up. What's the next holiday? You missed Mother's Day. So sorry, moms. But yeah, you've got some sort of. I honestly, I bought us an espresso machine last year for Father's Day. We don't have a child, nor am I pregnant. But I was like, yeah, I'm your daddy. I'm buying this espresso machine for me for Father's Day. So buy yourself a Theragun for Father's Day, my ladies, because maybe you being a dad. So that's our shout out. Let's end it with Society Slam before I get super weird. We're at like minute 80 of the podcast. So if you've made it this far, we know that you're a true fan. To start things off, I actually just read this. And so I don't have any science, but I'm curious if you guys have any anecdotal stories maybe that goes along with this. And the first one that wrote in said, "Hello ladies, thank you so much for the awesome content lately. It's been so fun listening as you and your guests ramp up your 2024 seasons. I'm wondering if you know whether there's any science behind the theory, kind of anecdotal, that if you can taste salt, then you know you're well hydrated, probably well salted. But if you cannot taste it, then you know you're behind on electrolytes. And I'm wondering if you guys, so that was the question, wondering if you all have any anecdotal salt reference points.
I'm not sure.
I think that's probably false.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably anecdotal, right?
Yeah,
like,
I think that's anecdotal. I do know, like, when I'm not super well hydrated, I'm very thirsty and like will either crave something salty or something plain, right? So it's like when I'm craving plain water, it's normally like I had too much salt. Then I'm craving like an electrolyte drink. It's like, oh, I really needed the salt, or like craving Pringles or something. Salty, and so I'd say like maybe do that as your taste barometer. But yeah, I mean, maybe we look into it and we can go into detail in the next Society Slam, because I think this is a fun like myth or fact or fiction question. So maybe stay tuned in 2 weeks. We'll look into it a little bit.
Yeah. I immediately thought of Adam St. Pierre and his like master's thesis stuff about like he would always hone in on the thing of like drink to thirst, because your thirst is a very good cue to tell you to rehydrate. And I think like you're saying, Keely, I've always like listened to my body of like craving salt, but maybe that's not as tried and true as
it depends a lot, I think, on race duration as well, because that was kind of like the old Noakes theory, like the waterlogged theory was like that you had to drink to thirst and we were all overhydrating, and I think that's also been kind of rebuted, that's not a word, but I think I said it with confidence though, right? So yeah, exactly, I rebuked, but that's not the right word for that term either. But I do think that there's definitely science on both sides when it comes to like thirst versus needing to kind of be on a schedule. And generally speaking, it seems like we're really somewhere in the middle where you should have a plan, and then you need to adjust the plan based on how you're feeling or the temperature of the day, et cetera. So we'll dive into that a little bit to see if there's any sort of, you have receptors in your mouth and oropharynx that definitely respond to salt. So curious to see. That's part of what actually my master's thesis was supposed to be on, and we were going to put NG tubes in people and squirt saline down their throats. So and look for thirst responses, which did not happen because I dropped out of my master's thesis, but that was a Marty Hoffman idea. So maybe we can bring that back for you guys.
Yeah. I know, like, I don't know if you guys have ever felt this way, but like sometimes when I take a liquid iron supplement, when I'm super anemic, I like feel like it tastes more like iron than when I'm not. But it could just be me.
Evolution. The placebo and nocebo effect are both very real.
Yep.
Okay. Who wants to give me a shout out for being on a different podcast?
Oh no, I shouted it out just because. Oh my gosh, no, it was good. I don't know if you guys had a chance to listen to it, but like Travis Macy, he did a great interview with you, Corinne, and like you just have like just so many different, you wear so many different hats. And so I think it's like to get a true appreciation. I know that you guys who listen to the podcast, like, how well-versed and knowledgeable Corinne is, and, that she's a coach and an athlete and an editor and all these other things. But I encourage you to take a listen to that podcast. And yeah, it was really good.
Now that you've finished ours, you can go listen to that.
Yeah, you can add Travis Macy's to the rest of your long run. It was a great conversation. Had a really fun time talking with him. So that was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last but not least, we got 2 shout outs around eating, which we love. One is someone has a shirt that says "Girls Who Eat." Love that.
And she was like lifting like something really heavy. She's like really into CrossFit, and her shirt just said "Girls Who Eat." And she's like lifting this crazy stone thing. It was funny.
There we go. And then the last one is someone thanks us for talking more about eating on runs. We love you. Keep eating on runs. And they said, truly a game changer. Their new run mantra is "Did you eat?" Which I like that.
That sounds like a Keely, Rachel Drake conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
That is our conversation most of the time.
Well, with that, hopefully you're out there on the trail. Honestly, we should probably insert like 30-minute timers into our thing to say, "Did you eat?" every 30 minutes of our podcast. So while this podcast winds down and you're on your run, we're going to ask you, did you eat? And until next time, we'll catch you out on the trails.